preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. It's pretty incredible to see so many people here on such a night. My goodness, I think there's a beautiful night. There you go. A beautiful night. It was raining, now it's snowing. Who knows what will be in an hour or two. At any rate, welcome. I am very, very happy to see you all here. My name is Deborah Nadell McGee, and I am the director of the Charles Simon Center for Adult Life and Learning here at the 92nd Street Y. And I'd like to welcome you to our series, America and the World. Tonight's guest is the Honorable Judith Kaye, Chief Judge of the State of New York and Chief Judge of the New York State Court of Appeals. She will be interviewed by Leonard Lopate, who is the host of the WNYC radio talk show, New York and Company, and he also has a new television show called Metro Weekend, which can be seen on Fridays and Sunday mornings. Following the interview, we will be taking questions from you, the audience, and you have probably been handed cards on which to write your questions. During the interview, there will be an usher who will be walking around taking your cards from you. As for now, there's lots to talk about tonight, so I'm going to get out of here and bring on our guests. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Judge Judith Kaye and Leonard Lopate. Thank you.
Let's get right into it. I've always thought that the fantasy of every jurist in America was an appointment to the Supreme Court. And you turn that down.
Well, that's only the fantasy of people who are not the Chief Judge of the State of New York.
You mean being the Chief Judge is better than replacing Byron Whizzer White in the Supreme Court?
I think I have the two best jobs in the world. I'm the Chief Judge of the State of New York, and I'm also the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals of the State of New York. And yes, I would say the grand total is better than anything I can think of.
You also turned down the Attorney General's job.
Well, I never actually turned things down. I turned them away. That is the truth.
And that was right after Mario Cuomo turned down the Supreme Court job. You turned it away. And maybe it's something about the water in Albany.
New York State, I think.
Really, you like being in Albany that much?
Well, actually, I'm a genuine through and through New York City person at this point. I spend about 2 weeks of every 5 in Albany, weekends at home, and most of my time in the city of New York.
Do you have any doubt that the other Judge Judy would have jumped at the opportunity?
I guess, let's see, I'd use one of her lines. Do you see stupid written on my forehead? I don't think I'm the same kind of judge as Judge Judy. Although, as I was telling you a few moments ago, I've now since heard of one better than Judge Judy. I've heard, somebody told me that there's Judge Julie on the porno channel.
And she sits on the
talk about
real
disrobing.
State of Appeals, Court of Appeals. I'll get that joke out.
I think we shouldn't take this further.
So let's talk about those two jobs. What do they entail exactly? You're responsible for the workings of the 7-member Court of Appeals.
Yes, and for 10 years, actually, that's the job that I had, a very, very full-time job. And I definitely think the best job, one of the best jobs in the world. I am the first among 7 equals as the Chief Judge of the state's highest court. In this state, I guess Maryland is like us too. In this state, we call our highest court the Supreme Court. I think of it kind of...
Well, we don't call ours the Supreme Court.
We call ours the Court of Appeals. I think of our entry-level court as the Supreme Court, and then our intermediate court as the Supremer Court, and the Court of Appeals is the Supremest Court. We have 7 judges. We sit to hear arguments about 2 weeks out of every 5 in Albany, and it's really a great court, a wonderful court. I wish more people would come see us up in Albany and certainly stay familiar with our decisions.
And you were the first woman appointed to that.
First woman appointed by Mario Cuomo back in 1983, yes. And I say that was a great job for 10 years and my only job when one day I became the chief judge of the state of New York, which is the second job.
Because Saul Wachtler...
Because of Saul Wachtler's resignation, yes.
After he was arrested. You had sat next to him.
Yes, for 10 years I sat next to him on
Didn't
the
even
bench.
touch your knee or anything?
Well, I'd say in many ways he touched me as a great jurist, a really good friend, and then I think of that as probably the closest I have seen of a genuine human tragedy.
Mm-hmm. Was he also in charge of the unified court system?
Yes, because that happened back in the year 1977. We had a constitutional change that created what we have the nerve to call the unified court system. We actually have a very disunified court system, but the chief judge became both the head of the court system and the head of the Court of Appeals.
9 separate courts. Why does one person have both? Shouldn't this job be given to 2 different people? It sounds like there's an awful lot of stuff in just running the courts of the state.
Well, there is a lot, and there's a terrific, I get to appoint the chief administrative judge. He serves at my pleasure, Judge Lippman, Jonathan Lippman. And he's kind of the chief operating officer of the state court system, and he really does the day-to-day management of the court system. I think it's a very good idea that one person, especially since that person is me, has charge of both the Court of Appeals and the court system.
And as you describe it, you do everything from slips and falls to industrial disasters, from crimes of the heart to crimes on the street.
I'm beautiful.
Quoting
Is
you.
that something I wrote?
This was in a speech.
Yeah.
From decedents' estates to embryos still in petri dishes, from an individual lease to a worldwide financial transaction to a far-reaching constitutional question.
Really an incredible court, I might say. And I guess most recently, people in New York City would be familiar with our sex shop decision, where we sustained the constitutionality of the law that permitted the closings. I wrote for the court the decision about preservation of frozen eggs, and that's the decision you just referred to.
The Petri dish.
The Petri dish, right. We had a decision recently about landlord liability for in public housing where there's negligent security. We have First Amendment decisions. We have every kind of case you can possibly imagine.
Cut down part of the New York State death penalty law, which we'll get to later.
Okay. I can certainly wait for that discussion. No rush.
The caseload, you say, is increasing at an alarming pace, well over 3 million filings a year, and that's more than all of the federal court filings nationwide?
That's 10 times more than all of the federal court filings nationwide, and the courts are a growth industry.
Why New York? Because we are the center of things?
Well, New York and probably California have the busiest state court systems, but when you think about it, when you break it down, we have probably 1 million or so criminal cases. We have, every year, we have more than 700,000 family cases. That's our biggest, the biggest part of our growing docket, the family cases.
Where people are filing for divorce, or?
No, really, people can file for divorce in the Supreme Court, although that is a growth industry too, but I was thinking more of the dysfunctional family cases, the child abuse and neglect, domestic violence, termination of parental rights, foster care cases. That's a tremendously growing part of our caseload.
Well, I was surprised to see that you can't always deal with these kinds of cases in one court because of the way the courts are set up. For example, in a divorce case, Supreme Court handles the divorce, but child custody is family court. And it seems so cumbersome.
Seems that way to me too, as a matter of fact.
Is it that way in other states as well?
No, I think there we have a distinction. I think we have the most cumbersome court system in the entire United States. And we've been trying hard. In fact, I was a little kind of disappointed recently when I attended a rally. We've been trying to get court reorganization now for a couple of years, and the League of Women Voters has been staunchly in our corner. I was a little disappointed to hear they've been staunchly in our corner since the year 1955, trying to get court reorganization. So I'm very pleased to have their leadership, their company, but gee, it seems like an awfully long time. And you mentioned quite correctly, you can have, for example, you can have an adoption in the Supreme Court, you can have one in the surrogates court, and you can have one in the family court. And sometimes you can get whipsawed among the three courts.
There was a study done in 1966 that found that New York State's 61 city courts are understaffed and overworked, and that overtime is a fact of life. So why isn't the legislature doing something about it?
Well, I think we've been working very well with the legislature in recent years. We've made good headway on there are a lot of administrative innovations and initiatives that we've undertaken ourselves. We've gotten good help from the legislature. I think this final piece would really make a tremendous difference.
Recent legislative acts have been credited with increasing the processing times, like greater penalties for drunk driving, for example, on a state level, forgetting about what the mayor is doing with people's licenses here.
Yeah, I don't know any judge in the state court system who wonders what to do with their extra time. We all have very full lives.
Well, do you follow what the legislature is doing and say, oh no, they just passed a law that means more overtime, or
I read the laws.
100,000 more cases next year?
But, judges are not policymakers, and it's the legislature, the executive, that are the policymakers in this state. I'm very comfortable with my role.
Do you see an increase in the courts here because of Mayor Giuliani's car confiscation policy?
I'm confident we will, and I'm confident we'll have a challenge to the constitutionality. I believe a case has already been filed, which will work its way up to the Court of Appeals.
Governor Pataki has been very critical of the New York State judiciary. He's given speeches in which he's said things like, and I'm quoting this one because it's so nice, "I cannot help but believe that ours would be a better society if we had a few less volumes of state regulations and a few thousand less lawyers interpreting them." You agree?
I don't know. I was listening very carefully because you introduced that by saying it would be a criticism of the courts. The regulations.
Well, there are more things to come.
The regulations, of course, are made by the regulators, by the lawmakers, by the administrative agencies, and when there are regulations, there will be contests, there will be controversy over them, so I'm not surprised by that.
Well, he's complained about the proliferation of lawsuits and instances where judges hand down rulings that dictate how government should be run. I know at Law Day he gives a speech and you give a speech.
And we have very differing views.
Yeah, and then he
about
walks
many
out
things.
before your speech is delivered, so he won't have to hear your rebuttal.
Well, that leaves me a lot more freedom, doesn't it? Actually, I don't want to leave the impression that we've been at loggerheads, because I think we had a bad period a couple of years ago. But actually, I think our relations have been excellent, and the governor he's very supportive, for example, of our court reform program, and he's been very cooperative in a lot of instances.
Well, it all changed right before the last election, but before then he also said they're setting their own rules. The Court of Appeals has gone too far, and that was after a woman was stabbed and nearly killed by a burglar who wasn't in jail because the Court of Appeals had made some rulings that allowed him to stay free.
Now you're getting warmer, right?
Yeah.
Well, the courts are such an easy target, aren't they? It's so easy to make these swipes at the courts, and especially since they don't answer back. It encourages people who take these shots.
You can't answer back?
It's hard. It's very hard to answer back. I mean, I've thought sometimes of having a headline on the New York Post. You know, Judy rips Rudy, Rudy rips Rudy, slams Judy. I mean, that's not the way courts behave. You know, and We have certain ethical constraints. We have to maintain our impartiality. We have to maintain our dignity. We have to maintain a certain aloofness and remoteness. I think that goes with the turf. Mm-hmm. We're not elected officials in that sense and policymakers in that sense. On the other hand, I think to some extent we do have to answer back, and we do have to make some attempt to reach out to educate the public about what it is that we do, because nobody else is doing it. Certainly the media isn't doing it, and the elected officials aren't doing it. So really it should be the lawyers and judges who are taking a more active role in reaching out to the public so that there aren't misunderstandings of this nature.
Well, I think if you read the newspapers, you'll find general agreement with the governor and other critics that there are just too many liberal judges who are much too soft on crime.
And people say that until they're in trouble themselves, or until they see something something they hold dear taken from them, or some right they feel is a prized right, until that's intruded on. And I think we tend to be very negative and cynical generally, maybe too much so, and don't sufficiently value the institution of the courts and the judiciary. I think they're very important to American society, to the kind of society we all want to have and live in.
Well, I don't know how many judges there are that you're overseeing, but there has to be a wide range from the best,
from good to superb. Yeah. Yes, and
a couple of clinkers. I don't know whether you
no,
consider...
those are federal judges.
I don't know.
There are 1,200 state-paid judges, and then we have a couple of thousand town and village justices too.
Well, when someone like Lauren Duckman gets into trouble, we had Pataki and Dennis Vacco, then the Attorney General calling for his ouster because he had lowered bail for a man who was threatening his girlfriend, and then 3 weeks later that man shot and killed that girlfriend. But then it turned out that Duckman was accused of having anti-prosecutor attitudes, that he'd actually made comments.
I'm very familiar with the case.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. What happens when that kind of thing becomes public? Do you take it personally?
Well, I'd rather take it out of the Judge Duckman model that you've suggested, and talk about judges generally who, what you used the word a few moments ago, the clunkers, or I guess in all of human society, whatever it is that you do, there's invariably and regrettably somebody who doesn't do it well.
But sometimes good law could lead to bad decisions.
Well,
can't it?
but when there's a judge who is wronging, not making decisions we disagree with and reverse on appeal, but somebody who is corrupt or just not doing the job at all. That's not something that we gather around and protect either. That having corruption in the judiciary is odious to the judiciary, and there are cases that go before the Commission on Judicial Conduct, and occasionally, very occasionally, there are judges who are removed from office.
Mm-hmm. And he took an indefinite leave and then was removed afterward?
Well, there were charges pending that had to be proved.
I would say that a large segment of the public feels that some judges are more concerned with the rights of the accused than of the victims. I hear that again and again.
I hear that too.
Mm-hmm.
I say we have a complete range of humanity represented in the judiciary. I think...
Well, do you think it's true?
That there are some judges more concerned with the accused than the victim. I think overwhelmingly judges are concerned with the law and what the law provides, and I think they do a good job of seeing that the law is enforced and applied.
The governor would like to see a change in the system, like allowing prosecutors to challenge low bail set by judges. Do you think that would be a good idea?
Well, I think sometimes we lose sight of the purpose of bail, and that's one instance where a better informed public would understand that the purpose of our bail statutes is simply to secure the presence of the defendant.
I mean, not make it impossible for the person to get out into the public.
Our bail statutes are designed to secure the presence of the defendant. I think they're operating well. If the policymakers think there should be a change in the bail statutes, I'm not going to engage them in a debate on that.
He was particularly angered when the Court of Appeals, which you sit on and head, struck down a portion of the death penalty law. Now, what was the problem with that portion? You didn't get rid of the death penalty law, just a certain part of it.
No, we didn't get rid of the death penalty law, and that was a unanimous decision of our court.
In other words, conservatives and liberals on the court.
Good judges were exercising good sense. We struck down the plea provision of the death penalty statute because the penalty was the same whether you pleaded guilty or went to trial, and it discouraged. There was a maximum term of life imprisonment if you pleaded guilty, but you were subject to the death penalty only if you decided to go to trial before a jury. So that was kind of a penalty for going to trial.
So if you said, I'm innocent, I want to go to trial because I am innocent of this crime, then you were penalized.
That's right. You were subject to the death penalty, whereas if you said, I don't think I'm guilty, but I'm going to plead guilty, then the maximum penalty would be life imprisonment.
Now, the DA of Brooklyn, Charles Hines, said that he was going to appeal that to the Supreme Court, and that was applauded by the governor. Has it been appealed to the Supreme Court?
Not to my knowledge. I know that they sought a stay from us, which was denied, but I don't know. Do you?
No, I haven't heard anything about it. Maybe that was the thing that you had to say at the time.
You know,
yeah.
Right.
And maybe they thought that they didn't have a good case.
I think our decision was correct.
You also want to limit the number of peremptory challenges in criminal cases.
Well, now you're
that's
coming.
That's going to mess me up, because whenever I go on a jury and I want to get off, I make sure that they're going to challenge me.
How do you do that?
Well, first of all, I say I'm a talk show host, and that's the first thing.
Oh, but now they're our favorite people down at the jury service.
There are other things that you can do. Should I reveal these to jurors?
I'd like to know, because I
want to plug up the loopholes. One thing that you do is you show a lot of enthusiasm, and every time a question is asked, you always raise your hand and let them know that you have been to that place or experienced that thing. Or
I think I know the defendant. That kind of
and
thing.
All you have to do is just let them know that you would be a ball of fire in that jury room, and they get rid of you.
Well, I was called myself, and I thought...
You mean after you were chief judge?
Yes, as the chief judge. In fact, I've just received a second qualification questionnaire, so I think I'll be called again. But I did exactly the opposite, and I behaved very unobtrusively, and I was knocked off too.
Yeah, but I can appreciate that. But the problem with peremptory challenges is not you and me. It's really people who are knocked up because they're women, because they're black, because they're old, because they're young, because of things that shouldn't allow for a challenge.
You've touched a really raw nerve, because the subject of peremptory challenges is something that bothers me a lot. We have more peremptory challenges, and by that, of course, we mean the idea that you can just look somebody in the eye and say, I don't like the way you comb your hair, and so you're off.
My mother used to say.
Yes, and in criminal cases, in the top felony cases, you get up to 20 peremptory challenges. That means a lot of jurors have to be called, a lot of good citizens called, taking time from their lives, their jobs, whatever. They get called down to court, they get questioned, and for no reason they can understand, they're knocked off. And we have to call large numbers of people because of the large numbers of peremptory challenges. So that's a subject that bothers me a lot. And in fact, on the civil side, we were successful in getting the number of peremptory challenges reduced to 3 per side. We used to have many more in civil cases too. But we've had a very hard time budging the legislature because both the district attorneys and the criminal defense bar like it the way it is, and so it stays.
In civil cases, peremptory challenges seem to me to be part of a game that has little to do with deciding the case, because you go through that whole process and then they tell you to come back in a day or two and you're told that they settled out of court.
When's the last time you were there?
I can't admit to this. Well, I guess about 3 years ago. I was there
You're
2 days.
Soon again.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
But I think you'll find, I asked you that question because I think you'll find we're doing somewhat better.
You have said jury reform as one of your basic...
Oh, that's a high priority, right? And we started that 5 years ago, and I think we've made tremendous progress with improving the jury system. We've got a long way to go. You know, we call about 600,000 jurors a year, so you're talking about a lot of things that need to be fixed, but we're fixing a lot of them. We now have people who clean the bathrooms. That's important. It's important that people who come in for jury service have a clean and dignified surrounding.
And you also let people leave in a couple of days if nothing is happening. In the past, they just sat around as though there was some penalty involved.
It's incredible to think that just 5 years ago, the jury service in New York City was a minimum of 2 weeks. You'd have to show up for 2 weeks. And today, in nearly every county of the state, not quite yet New York City, we're down to 1 day or 1 trial. And in some places like Westchester, you can call in even for that day to see if you're needed. I mean, this is just sort of humane, I think.
Okay, so we have 600,000 people in a year, some of whom would do almost anything to avoid jury duty, and others who just love it. Why not just simply send out a poll and find the 600,000 a year who want to serve?
Well, you remind me that my daughter several years ago was down as a juror and called. She put a whole new light on jury service for me. She called from the jury room and said, "This is a great place to meet guys." So we abolished the exemptions for doctors and lawyers. Just like
for her.
This is... But of course,
and undertakers. What about undertakers?
But of course, we can't just let people pick themselves. That's the whole idea of the jury, is that it should be somewhat representative of society. So we can't just pick people who would volunteer to do it. We have to have everybody come. And I think the point and my responsibility is to make the experience better. I think it's important. I hope everybody, I don't mean to sound Pollyannish about this. I know it's an interruption for everyone. It can't ever be something that everyone will want to sign up for. But I would hope people would look forward to it as an opportunity to come in and see what's going on in the court system. And from my point of view, it's an excellent opportunity to show people what's going on in the court system and to show them something that works well.
I had a couple of problems. One time I went to jury duty. When I came back, they had figured out a way to eliminate my job. So within 3 days, I was out of that company. Another time, I served on a jury in a criminal case, and we went through a long process. We were sequestered overnight in Staten Island at a Holiday Inn, and we finally, that forced us to come to a decision.
They've closed that Holiday Inn, you know.
Thank God. We came to a decision rather than go there another night, but it was a long, tedious task, and the judge, I think, was Betty Weinberg, and after we decided that we couldn't find the defendant guilty, she came charging into the jury room and said, "How could you do that? This guy's in jail for 6 similar crimes." So we all were very upset. And about a week later, the assistant DA, William Hannay, called me at home. I've never forgotten these names. And he asked me whether I had been responsible for turning the jury, which I found very upsetting. So there are other things that you don't even know about that happen that
I know about a lot of things that happen because people write to me a lot, and I encourage that.
Yeah, I didn't write to anybody.
Well, you should write to me. Everybody should write to me.
Is Betty Weinberg still on the course?
She just became the presiding justice, in fact, of the
good.
intermediate appellate
If
court.
she's out there, I didn't say a word, and if I ever appear before you, it's not
I
true.
encourage people to write to me. First of all, I like to know. I really, and the only way I can find out, you're right, I can't go into all the courts. I go to as many as I can, but I can't go to all of them. But when somebody writes to me with a complaint, I just immediately forward it to the administrative judge in the particular court, and I say, please answer this person and send me a copy of the letter. Things get fixed. They do. So I think, I really hope people will write. I hope people will write and tell me good, occasionally somebody writes something nice.
Well, the real scary thing for people who have other jobs is to get something that invites you to become a member of the grand jury, because that's a real commitment. Commitment
is one good word, yes. It's
can be weeks and weeks, and if it's Ken Starr, who knows how long it will.
Actually, we have, I think, I must have 10 or 15 ongoing jury projects right now. I say we're so far from where I hope this will be in a couple of years. One of the inquiries you'll be interested to know, I appointed a little commission of lawyers who had been jurors. I was interested to know what they could tell us, because these are people who had one foot in the legal profession and one foot in the jury room, and they came back with some very interesting ideas, and with one statistic that I loved, and that is that lawyers today are being picked for juries at just the same rate as non-lawyers, and that was a great relief
Never
to me.
used to be. They were afraid that lawyers
That's right.
would influence the jury.
And I learned that there was one jury that had 7 lawyers, which gives real meaning to the word trial, I think. Imagine what a trial. But I'm not avoiding your question about the grand jury, because I also appointed a group to study the grand jury. I think really what happens today is just terrible. People are called for 1 solid month, and I guess you know about that.
And the perception is that it's so structured that they will do whatever the DA asks them to do anyway.
I've heard that. I have not served on a grand jury.
So it's a rubber stamp experience.
I've heard that. But I put together this group. I'm expecting a report in the next couple of weeks, and the charge that I gave to them was not to recommend that the grand jury be abolished, but just to tell me how it could be fixed, because I'm convinced it can be fixed. There was one time in our history where people reporting for what we call the petty jury, which is the non-grand jury, the everyday jury, they had to report for a whole month too. So I think that probably had to do with geography and transportation more than anything else. And now we've fixed the petty jury so that you have 1 day or 1 trial. Why on earth do you need a whole month for a grand jury? I don't know, but I'm going to find out.
I read somewhere that you would like to see a wholesale recodification of our criminal laws. Now the last time that happened was about 30 years ago?
It's just about 30 years ago that happened.
Why is it necessary every 30 years? Isn't a crime a crime?
Don't you think it's a good idea to take a look at something every 30 years? Society has changed so much. We have these piecemeal changes. We have dozens and dozens of amendments every year to the to the penal law. We have 2 sets of laws, the penal law, the criminal procedure law. Isn't it time that somebody sat down and took a look and modernized our law so that it fit modern society?
How would they be modernized? What would you like to see changed immediately?
Well, I'd like somebody to sit down and study from one end to the other and update the law in a comprehensive fashion rather than and this would take years too. It wouldn't be done right away.
For example, people have been complaining about the Rockefeller drug laws for a long time, and this cuts across the political spectrum. William F. Buckley Jr. and people like that are also opposed to them. They'd like to see in fact, he would like to see marijuana legalized. But no matter how many people complain, it remains on the books.
Well, I think the level of dissatisfaction is growing, and there's a much more representative group seeking reform also, and I hope that this year there will be some effective reform. About a year ago, I make what's called a State of the Judiciary speech every year, and last year I urged the legislature to make some reform in the Rockefeller drug laws, but that you didn't hear about any change, did you?
Well, it's my perception
done
that
it again this year.
the two houses, one being controlled by the Democrats, one being controlled by the Republicans, make it almost impossible for anything as big as this to go through.
Well, the governor has expressed an interest in reforming the Rockefeller drug laws, and with his leadership, many changes have taken place, and I believe that this could be done as well.
It's been given as the reason for the overcrowding of New York State's jails, because so many people who have been arrested with any amount of illicit drugs will go to jail rather than
very
other
small
ways.
amounts, possession of 2 ounces, sale of 2 ounces, possession of 4 ounces, and there's a mandatory prison sentence of 15 years to life.
It's the mandatories that really make this
It's a mandatory sentence. So while you talk about the large numbers, I think what really tugs at the heartstrings and strikes one as a terrible injustice is some of the very young, nonviolent people who are caught in this web. I mean, it's cases like that, and I've seen a book, so I'll use the phrase called "Shattered Lives," and that's really what it seems so disproportionate, so unjust.
Oh, it's better to commit a murder, rob a bank, do all sorts of other.
It's definitely not good to do that.
No, but if you're thinking about length of sentence, if you're caught with a couple of ounces of a drug, you'll go to jail for a lot longer than if you do something really awful to somebody.
You're really addressing what's so terribly troubling about how disproportionate these sentences are, and so many people. Not that they shouldn't be punished. This is, it's a grave offense to possess and deal in drugs. But these sentences are just completely disproportionate to.
Well, what are the alternatives to incarceration? Drug rehab programs?
Well, I think in the courts we've been experimenting with something very promising, and that is these drug treatment courts. We now have about 15 in the state of New York. We've taken a real leadership role in the state of New York in drug treatment because the courts have an opportunity. The courts have a coercive power. The courts can, you can send somebody to prison for a good long time. So we have been using that as an opportunity, with the consent of the district attorney, to supervise people through a period of drug rehabilitation. By the end of this year, 1999, we'll have more than 3,000 people in drug rehabilitation under the supervision of the courts.
So how do you get around the Rockefeller drug laws?
These are with the consent of the district attorney, and these are in effect situations where pleas are taken, and to a lesser degree of the crime. And we have probably the biggest drug treatment court in the country, I think, is in Brooklyn, where we focus on female substance abusers. And I might say these are tremendously encouraging, successful, promising. I hope they will gain wider use.
There was a shocking frontline report on the way drugs are handled in the courts, not necessarily in New York, where often people are forced to trade names, and the person who winds up going to jail is often the one who was the least complicit in the crime, but the one who couldn't come up with any other names to trade.
Sounds like something I saw on television or in the movies, right?
No, it was on Frontline very recently, and sometimes people were even giving names of their lawyers simply to get out, making deals that seem so unfair, and yet it seems to happen most in the drug field because everybody wants, at least the laws are designed to try to get Mr. Big.
I'll take your word for that.
Okay, that hasn't come before your court. No. What about the whole matter of politics? Is it possible for our courts not to reflect the political philosophies of the people involved?
The people involved being the judges or the appointing authorities?
The judges, the prosecutors, the lawyers, or the people who are being tried. We wind up with people all talking about things in political terms, even though the courts, at least in theory, are intended to be objective, aren't they? They're supposed to be seekers of the truth.
Well, I'm back to point A. I think we started back there a while ago on the fact that under the black robe beats a human heart. There's no getting away from that. But I think by and large, overwhelmingly, the judges do a pretty good job of enforcing the statutes, protecting constitutional rights. I think we do a pretty good job.
Conservatives feel often that the courts get too involved in social issues, and when judges enforce busing or integration of neighborhoods or of schools, that they are really going beyond what the Constitution allows.
I'm not aware. I don't know of any cases that have been instituted by judges. Do you? Cases come to the courts, and then courts decide them. We deal with what's brought to us. But again, you've touched a raw nerve, because a great deal of what we do, especially in the state court system, is deal with social problems that have eluded other branches of government, and that's certainly what we see in the drug cases you mentioned. I mean, the war on drugs is being fought in the courts, and that's true in cases of family dysfunction. Problems that would have been handled with community supports, with help from individuals, now these have all become court cases. So courts dispense justice in the particular matters that are brought before them, but very often we're dealing with very difficult social problems that have frustrated and eluded other branches of government.
And when things go wrong, the newspapers blame the social worker and the judge.
They do. I've noticed that. That's right. Very, very difficult position for judges. And we certainly have to do better. I can tell you a couple of years ago when I thought I'd have to wear dark glasses on the street, some of the press was so terrible. I think we sort of came...
Not all newspapers. It's mostly the Post, isn't it, that really goes after you?
Well, the Post is right at either the zenith or the nadir, I would say. The nadir, to be honest.
Don't confuse it with Ralph Nader, of course.
No, but the truth is, I think we've kind of come to a little bit, and we have to be much better ourselves. We have to get our voice. We have to find a way to speak out in a way that's ethical and appropriate for judges. And I know in the court system, we have now, we have a public information officer. We didn't used to do that. Somebody who, when there's an attack on a bail decision, for example, an irresponsible attack, somebody who will get back to the reporter and say, here's the transcript, here's what happened, here's the inquiry that was made. I think we have to take more responsibility for our own defense.
Well, we don't hear the sorts of embarrassing things that we hear from other courts. Recently, there was an Italian judge who said that a woman in tight jeans could not be raped, things like that. We don't tend to hear about those things in New York State courts, and I wonder whether it's because we have these great judges, or is there some kind, do people like you send down directives saying, let's be reasonable in cases like that?
Do you have any doubt, given the strength of the New York press, do you have any doubt that if anything like that was going on anywhere, that you'd see it immediately? I have none.
But do you send out directives?
I was going to say, and second of all, have you met my judges? A directive from me, oh my goodness, these are very independent people, and I certainly don't direct their decision making in any way.
How well are the courts handling cases of domestic violence? I know that's been a concern for you.
It's been a tremendous concern to me, and I think we're doing a reasonably good job now. And we have made tremendous changes. This is a subject where all of society, including the courts, has learned so much in recent years about what domestic violence is, about the nature of domestic violence. In the court system, our more recent response has been to establish special domestic violence courts. We're putting them all through the city and more widely in the state, and I think these are terrific. These are courts where the judges are trained and educated in the particular problems of domestic violence, where there is the same judge, a dedicated judge in the part, which gives the victim, alleged victim, a sense of security about the proceeding. Again, the judge, we have resource coordinators, and we have victim advocates, and we have batterers programs, and we've really gotten on the case of domestic violence, and including training of all judges throughout the state in all issues of family violence. We've learned a lot.
Because there was a time when the police would show up in a family dispute, and unless they really saw a crime occurring, they would leave. They probably tell people to keep it down. Rape also, I remember someone telling me that after a rape, a cop actually asked her if she had enjoyed it at least. That was 30 years ago. Today, you can't imagine anybody anywhere in the legal system asking a question like that. So we've become more sophisticated.
We've all learned so much about domestic violence, and we're still learning. I saw a film clip, probably 5 or 6 years ago, that made such an impression on me of a police officer in a car riding through a neighborhood on the phone, with someone saying, ma'am, we're right around, the police officer was saying, we're right around the corner, we'll be there in a minute, and she was saying, no, you don't have to come, it was nothing, it was my fault, it was my jealousy, and don't come. And he was saying, ma'am, we're just there, we'll be there in just a minute. And she said, no, it's not necessary. And he said, ma'am, if it's really not necessary, would you say a number from 1 to 5? And there was a pause, and she said, 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought at that moment that I would hope every one of our judges would be sensitized in that fashion too. But this is a scourge of modern society that we're all learning about, every one of us.
We've been talking about your run-ins with some members of the press, which seems a bit ironic because your career began in journalism, didn't it? And that's what you thought you were going to be, a reporter?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I went to law school not to become a lawyer. I went to law school to become a journalist. It was so hard. I after graduation from college, thought I was the greatest thing to arrive on the scene in the newspaper world, but they didn't seem to feel that way. And so I had a job as a social reporter in Union City, New Jersey, and probably being in the shadow of the burlesque theater was the best thing about that job. But I started going to law school at night so that I could get on the news side of journalism, and that was what led me into the law.
Do you think that you weren't getting better? You were on the social page.
I was.
That's weddings and things like that.
Weddings and socials, yes.
Do you think that was because you were a woman?
It didn't hurt.
So then you went to law school at a time when there weren't a lot of women in law school either. But then again, your whole life has been strange. You come from an... Wait until I explain. You grew up in Monticello.
I did.
The daughter of immigrants, Polish, and
yes, they were great.
Named Smith.
That's correct.
There aren't too many Polish Smiths, as far as I know.
I suspect my grandfather in what was Russia, some days Russia, some days Poland, some days Germany, depending on which troops were occupying the town. I suspect he was a blacksmith, which is how they got that name.
And it was translated, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So you ran a store in Monticello. Some people may remember Smith's.
Smiths, yes, yes.
And
I learned a lot. I learned how to, first of all, I can wrap a great package. And that's a skill. That's a wonderful skill.
Holidays and birthday
yes, and
times.
in fact, I've been in places where somebody next to me was fumbling with a package, and I just take it away and I wrap it. I love to wrap packages, and I learned to wrap a great package. And actually, working in the store, as I did from the time I was tall enough to reach the counter, which was when I was about 7 years old, I think, because I'm so tall, it teaches a lot of character. You learn how to deal with people. And
you were also the people who lived in Monticello when the rest of us went there and wondered what it was like to live there.
That's correct, yes. And
were
we
you
were
dying to get
also
out?
wondering about all the rest of you.
Were you dying to get out? Find out what it was like in the South Bronx?
I was very eager to leave, and in fact, I came to New York City to Barnard College, which was quite a change. I will never forget my first night in New York City. I'll never forget the noise of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was different from Monticello.
Well, and now it's even quieter with all of those hotels closing down.
Very sad. It's hard for me to go to Monticello. Stephen, my husband who's here, Stephen and I were up. I never miss one of my high school reunions. That's just the best reunion ever. But the last time we went up, in I guess last June or so, I went into a store that was my parents' store. It's now kind of trinkets and trophies and things like that. And I said, I'm here to claim my parents' store, and they said, take it.
You have objected when people have wanted to call you a role model.
Well, I don't think of myself as a role model. You know, I say it's just hard enough getting through the day. It would make me very nervous to think other people were watching me and modeling their lives on mine in any way.
But it would be nice if someone said, I went into the law because Judith Kaye inspired me.
Well, I think they should go into the law for their own good reasons. I tell you, I've kind of relented a bit on that, because it is nice when someone says, go for it, and I see that you've been able to do this with your life, and I'm willing to give it a try too, because it's still tough, in the legal profession for women. Harder, I think, harder to balance family and work, and there are still some of the same difficulties I had all those years ago.
You considered Benjamin Cardozo to be a role model for you?
Well, he was the chief judge of my court. I know Benjamin Cardozo's work, and I have to tell you, I'm no Cardozo, but he's pretty terrific.
I knew Ben Cardozo.
Did you know Ben?
You know Cardozo? No.
It's so exciting. I mean, we live right near where he lived. We're members of his synagogue, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. I sit in his chair. I use his books. I picked up a book the other day in my chambers in Albany, and something I can't understand is that on the front cover, the hard cover of the book, in his handwriting was Benjamin N. Cardozo, Chief Judge, handwritten there. I cannot imagine that a person of that character would have mutilated a book that way. I mean, to think, and were they kind of stealing each other's books? I mean, why did he put his name on the book? But yet, it was really fun to hold that book and think he took the time to put his name on it. I mean, he had very characteristic handwriting.
We have received some questions from this very, very knowledgeable audience. I haven't even looked through them all, but the very first one is already intimidating. Comment on today's article in the New York Times about federal courts' two-tier system that are only one word,
I noticed
denied
that.
or
right. I noticed that, and that is an interesting article. I had not been aware that the federal courts were doing that so much.
They say because there are just too many cases and too many litigants.
That is troubling, don't you think so? That you should know in the federal, certainly appellate court, why you've won or lost a case, and law is made. So I did study that, and I studied the statistics, and I had not been aware that they were disposing of so many things so summarily. It would be troubling.
And you say that to every litigant, the experience is important, whether it's somebody who is involved in a complaint about a faulty refrigerator or somebody who is involved in a capital offense.
Absolutely. I don't think a case is ever an intellectual feast. I think a case is a flesh and blood problem of litigants, and I say it was disturbing to me when I saw that.
Here's another question. What can you do to facilitate the mayor's appointments to the family court? For example, in Queens, where they are down to 3 judges.
Talk to the mayor, which I do. In fact, it's a problem for us in the criminal court as well. We're short 9 judges in the criminal court of the city of New York, so we definitely have to get the mayor to make the appointments. All the pressure that can be brought on the mayor to make those appointments should be brought, starting with me.
Now, in New York, most judges are appointed. Or all are appointed, no? No, there are still some...
That's correct. We have both systems in the state court in New York. We have judges, most prominently the Supreme Court judges, arrive on the bench by popular election. Many other courts, you mentioned the family court, the court of claims, judges are appointed, some by the mayor, some by the governor. So we have everything in our system.
And each system seems to have problems built into it. We've heard about the inequities in Texas, for example.
We're back to the human factor, yeah. Yes.
So this is the question. How can one become a judge other than through the political process?
Well, I was never part of the political process myself. A miracle befell me, and I was appointed from trial practice to the highest court of the state. So one way you can become a judge is to have a miracle befall you. Another way is to involve yourself in the political process, which is perfectly, there's nothing wrong with joining in the political scene too.
And then hope that the person who's appointing is in your party.
Well, you just work hard that way. A third way is to try to distinguish yourself as a member of the bar. That's possible too. And so there are different ways to get to be a judge, but it's tough.
Here's one that says, "Thank you for being an elegant lady and speaking so well."
That's my husband, I'm sure.
No, I think there's somebody who wants to also slap me on the wrist because it says, "and speaking so well of Judge Saul Wachtler." Now, I met Saul Wachtler. I interviewed him after he wrote his book, and I found him to be a compelling person. I mean, this is a very smart man, and it's a tragic story.
Absolutely. Definitely.
But in a way, because it involved sex and all sorts of other things that seem to obsess us all, it causes troubles for the person involved that go way beyond whether, let's say he had been involved had been accused of taking a bribe or something like that. And we're seeing the same thing in Washington right now with the obsessions with the president and every other legislator who has strayed. I don't know where I'm leading here, but...
I was wondering myself, but I think other than a terrible personal loss, I just can't imagine anything worse than for a person to fall from that height, from the very privileged position of being the chief judge to suddenly having your life shattered. And I say again, I don't condone what he did, but to me it is the epitome of tragedy.
And you were totally unaware of it at the time?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, sometimes people, because he said that he was manic depressive, and that part of the problem was that he was having these mood swings which were causing him to do these things. And I remember reading almost everyone saying, well, I sure didn't see it. He seemed to be perfectly in control whenever he was on the bench.
I sat right next to him, and I read times that he'd like come off the bench and make some of these really strange telephone calls, but certainly he never did them in our presence.
No, he just said, I got to make a call, and you didn't know what that was about. What is your opinion of the current state of prosecutorial ethics, exculpatory evidence, harassing of witnesses?
Oh, goodness. That would be hard to answer in the abstract. I don't know how to begin to answer that. What does that mean to you?
What does that mean to me? I think this is a Ken Starr question, don't you?
Are you out there, Mr. Starr?
No, I think it's about Ken Starr.
I see.
People are concerned these days about the power that prosecutors have to coerce people into doing things they may not want to do otherwise. There's always a concern about checks and balances as well, isn't there?
Absolutely, and I think the role we perform is a vital role in that system.
Well, in this case, the court decided not to carry through the impeachment, right? I mean, they didn't do the removal of office, so...
You're talking now about the Senate?
Ken Starr, but I mean, it's the same thing.
You told me we would get to Monica. I said I just didn't believe it.
Well, maybe it's my mind.
Let's go back to Judge Julie.
What plans do you have for reform in divorce cases?
Good
and
question.
then let me add to these may all apply. Length of cases, time in court, changing judges on one case, discontinuity. How can best interests of child be preserved within adversarial system?
That is certainly a good question, and that is I understand that question completely, because that wraps in a whole lot of the problems that we're facing, particularly in matrimonial litigation, of cases that go on too long, too many changes of judges, too much...
Now, why does that happen? Why do judges change?
Too much grief for children. Well, we've taken care of that to a large extent, I think. I hope, when people ask me, well, what problems do you see, if I see a problem, I like to address it and not let it fester and linger. And I think we've really done much better, and we're doing much better in the area of matrimonial litigation. And one thing that we did a couple of years ago was to organize another specialized court. We've talked about the drug courts, we've talked about the domestic violence courts. We have dedicated matrimonial judges, so that sort of abuse doesn't happen as much. And it's certainly an area of the law that requires much more of our attention, but having these wonderful dedicated matrimonial judges has really helped to speed the process and eliminate some of the worst abuses. We're on the subject of the children, I'm very much concerned with the children. We have parental education programs now to educate people in the process of litigation to the damage that can be done to their children, and we're hoping to have the legislature allow us to make those mandatory. We're trying to get some legislation through that will make it impossible for property to be moved very early before judicial attention. There are definitely things we're trying to do in the area of matrimonial litigation. And on the subject of specialized courts, I just want to mention one more that's very close to me, and that is our business courts. Because after all, this is a great business center, and so in the state courts, we have specialized business courts.
With the business changing so much, expertise has to develop as well.
And there, too, we have judges with particular interest and expertise in business cases, so that businesses don't have to leave the state courts and go to federal forums or private judges. We want to be a full-service court system.
Based on my own experiences on the radio and calls that have come in based on certain segments, the whole matter of child custody is the single biggest problem in the minds of people out there. Men feel that they don't have a chance in many cases. In other cases, there are women who feel that fathers are given rights that they shouldn't be given because they're abusive or whatever, and the courts don't seem to be able... This is almost a Solomonic problem.
Very difficult. These cases are so hard, and we talked a little bit before about the court restructuring. We could make it a little easier if we didn't have the matrimonial case in the Supreme Court and the child custody case in the family court, with families being just shunted back and forth, so that a sensible plan of court reform would help somewhat. But this is one of those intractable problems we talked about, and we try to find new and better solutions to deal with a very, very difficult situation.
Here's a person who filled out 2 cards, both with long questions, but they're interesting.
Okay.
As the laws have changed to now include people with disabilities, how are those with disabilities, now able to take part in serving on a jury? That is, when cases through EEOC come to a level where a jury is needed, and or other cases where the person on trial has a disability. How are those with disabilities chosen to serve in higher law cases that involve a jury?
Well, this is another area where I'm pleased to say we're on the case. You know, these are situations that for so long had been neglected, not attended to. And today, thanks in part to the law that has changed, thanks in part to just a rising social awareness, we are more attentive to making it possible for citizens, whatever their situation, to become jurors. We want more people to be jurors, so we have more of the aids that are necessary, so that when somebody has some sort of disability, that person can serve, whether it's a hearing disability or a vision disability. You know, that just reminds me too that we've eliminated all exemptions. You know, there are no automatic exemptions, and so you can't age out of the jury system. And I had a letter from a woman not long ago who was about to celebrate her 103rd birthday, asking for a deferment so that
sorry.
But sorry was exactly the answer. So we make individual accommodations, and we want everyone to serve. And so if somebody needs help, I say, be it with vision or hearing or whatever, we do that.
Well, the other question from this person has to do with the whole chance aspect of being picked in a jury. It says people are assigned a number for a jury pool, and in that pool of people, they send out endless numbers, and some of those that receive numbers are never chosen. How can the problem of those who want to serve and are called in but not chosen for a jury be solved?
I wish I had the answer to that. To me, the most frustrating thing is that people come in. So many people these days tell me, Judge Kaye, you've made such terrific improvements at the court in jury service. I was in and out in just a day or 2 days. Well, to me, that's very unfortunate. I mean, I don't think it's a success when you're in and out and never get onto a jury. I think the success is when you're called, when you actually serve on a jury, when you deliberate, when you have the complete experience of being a juror. I think that's a productive use of someone's time, and that is the aspiration. Regrettably, too many people are called and don't get to serve, and that happens on the criminal side because we have so many peremptory challenges, and that happens on the civil side because so frequently cases are settled as soon as a jury is picked, and that's just a very unfortunate situation.
A number of studies have been done of juries, and it always turns out that people take the job very seriously. In fact, surprisingly seriously to most social commentators.
It's wonderful to look in the eyes of a jury and see how seriously people take it. And I hardly ever hear, I never hear from a person who has served to verdict about how unpleasant the experience was. The people who complain are the people who never, and justly so, the people who go down, spend time, and just don't get picked. So I think the ideal would be to bring people in numbers just to match what we needed, to bring them into facilities that were decent and clean, to have them treated courteously and well, and to have them see the system work at its best. That is the dream that we harbor.
Well, here's the other side of this.
Uh-oh.
Recently, people have been shocked by jury decisions. After seeing or reading transcripts of actual court procedure, can a presiding judge a jury's decision?
in very limited instances.
So in the O.J. case, the judge,
Not.
Judge Ito, could not have done a thing.
I think not.
And that's built into the law?
That's right. For most purposes, the jury
But sometimes a
verdict.
judge will set aside a jury
I say
decision if they
but-
find somebody guilty.
I say there are very limited situations where the verdict can be set aside by the judge.
Do you believe there are too many correctional institutions currently in New York State? Is our state inmate population too high? Would you advocate a lessening of penalties involving inmate status for minor drug possession, misdemeanors, for example, marijuana?
Well, I certainly do think that we need some reform of the very draconian drug laws that we have, as we discussed a little while ago. I don't know whether we have too many people incarcerated. I think that's again in the area of the policymakers, but I am concerned with what I see as a disproportion in some of the penalties, and I feel really quite proud of the success that we are having with alternatives. We talked about the drug courts, but there are many other alternatives to incarceration, and wonderful judges, I'm sure several of them here tonight, are using those and saving lives and helping to return people to productive lives instead of stashing them in prisons.
What are your views on witness participation, such as victim impact statements?
Well, that's, again, a new area where our consciousness is growing, and I know just recently there's even been a move to make that a constitutional reform, amending the United States Constitution. I heard about that not too long ago, which I think is a kind of an overreaction, to a constitution that's hardly ever been amended, to amend it for that reason. I don't have any particular position on them as a general matter.
Well, in New York State, jurors are not allowed to take notes, not allowed.
Wrong.
Well, that's what I've had people tell me, to just pay attention.
But you haven't been there for 3 years, so
it's
how
all
would you
changed.
know?
And also,
Yes.
in some places, you can ask questions. Jurors can.
Well, I feel quite differently about the note-taking and the question-asking. On the subject of note-taking, my court, the Court of Appeals, the court on which I serve, not long ago issued an opinion approving the judge's discretion in a criminal case to allow jurors to take notes. We all function so much on our personal experience. I'd be lost without taking notes. I have to you could take my notes away, but gee, I just have to write them down in order to learn. That's how my mind functions. So I was very pleased when our court approved note-taking, and immediately after that, the governing board of the court system issued a rule saying that judges in their discretion could permit the taking of notes by jurors, and that is being done as judges see fit. The subject of asking questions is different, and I don't know how I feel about
Because
that.
jurors get frustrated at times.
Oh,
and,
I imagine it's very frustrating.
Why aren't they asking about the whatever? And in some systems, they can hand questions in to the
Well,
judge.
I worry about it, and I see, you could have a quite orderly and sensible system like you have here tonight, instead of people just jurors standing up and asking questions. But what bothers me about the questions is something quite different. And that is something I've especially seen as I've sat on the Court of Appeals. We ask a lot of questions during oral arguments up at the court. The judges are very active questioners. And invariably, the following day in conference, I'll hear one of my colleagues say, well, remember when I asked that question and the lawyer said this? And the fact is that the question you ask is more important to you than anything else in the entire proceeding. And so I worry about juror questions because I think too much emphasis will be given to them in the mind of the juror. Now, I'm very open. I'm watching the research. There's so much research going on now in the area of jury service, because it's another thing we've awakened to. the importance of jury service. And so I'm watching, and I'm keeping an open mind about it, but I'm skeptical because I think the question you ask is really the only thing you'll listen to.
On the other hand, when you get into this adversarial approach, then, and two people trying to win, sometimes important questions don't get asked because they both have their own agendas there, and the jury is
a
really
risk.
just trying.
That is a risk, and sometimes I can imagine how frustrating it would be to sit and listen and really have a perfectly wonderful question to ask that goes unanswered.
Are you happy to have cameras in the courtrooms?
We don't have cameras, you know, in the New York State courtrooms. We have cameras in the Court of Appeals, the most beautiful courtroom in the world, 20 Eagle Street, Albany, New York. Come visit. We have had cameras in our courtroom for, probably 10 years. And our proceedings are shown on closed-circuit TV in Albany, and it is the single greatest aid to sleeping, I think, in the city of Albany. I went to...
You haven't seen C-SPAN.
It's better. But I was in a restaurant once, and a woman came over to me, and she said, "Judge Kaye, I do all of my ironing in front of your arguments." I thought that was so terrific. But in the trial courts, we don't have cameras. You know, we had the longest running experiment. We had this is legislative. It takes a statute to permit cameras in the courtroom. We had the longest running experiment because we had a pilot for 2 years, and then it was extended for 2 years and 2 years. Well, goodness, the last time it ran out, it didn't get renewed. And so there have been tremendous efforts to restore cameras to the trial courts, but as of today, they haven't succeeded.
Judge Judy, your major competition, Ed Koch, says that you can't get a decent Chinese meal in Albany. Is that still true, or has that changed as well?
Well, we do all right. You know, the Court of Appeals judges have a great tradition. We start very early in the morning at the courthouse. We have morning conference every day that we're there, which is wonderful, and I might say a difference from the Supreme Court of the United States, which conferences, I think, once a week. We conference every single day. We try to work out our problems with cases, reach a uniform decision. We have conference in the morning, we have argument in the afternoon, and then we all go to dinner together, which is really a nice tradition. And it is one of the, let's say, prerogatives on the one hand, or burdens of the chief judge to pick the restaurant every night. Now, I love Chinese food, so I have found a pretty decent Chinese restaurant in the city of Albany, but it wasn't easy.
Why are court orders, which have been decided after years of litigation, so easily re-argued and reversed? Why
I don't think that's
can't the courts reinforce their own court orders?
That's a hard
This
question.
must be based on somebody's experience.
I would think somebody had a bad experience, and I'd be pleased to hear about it, but I wouldn't be pleased to hear about it. I'd like to hear about it. But I don't think courts reverse their own. There is an appellate process in the state of New York. You get a basically trial court or initial court decision, which is for all practical purposes appealable to the intermediate appellate court as a matter of right. You get one appeal as a matter of right, and a case could be reversed because there was some error. And then we, at the Court of Appeals level, the second level of appeal, we choose our cases. It's called certiorari. We choose about 300 cases a year to hear out of the millions of cases. So most cases don't get reversed. Most cases stay.
But we hear again and again about long trials, and then a jury comes up with some figure, and then everybody says, wow, $8 million, it makes all the newspapers. And then quietly on page 93 of the New York Times, we see that a judge changed that and gave $10.28.
Well, verdicts are sometimes reduced. It will be interesting to see in the long run, now that all the automatic exemptions have been eliminated, and people like you will be serving on juries more often. No, people who traditionally were eliminated from the jury pool now are serving. All these lawyers are serving. It's going to be interesting in a few years to see whether there is an impact on verdicts, whether they're lower, I don't know. All these people who have been complaining for so many years about verdicts being too high now are going to be part of the process.
3 questions here. We'll go through them quickly. Your opinion on mandatory pro bono service?
I have difficulty with mandatory pro bono service. If you ask me about pro bono service, goodness, I think it's a professional responsibility. We have tremendous rewards being lawyers, and we also have a responsibility to serve the public.
But people shouldn't be forced.
Well, it's something I continue to consider as the chief judge, whether we should mandate pro bono service, but I hope we can encourage pro bono service so it will not be necessary to mandate it.
What ways can we put in place to ensure access to all New York State citizens? Legal services for the poor are seriously lacking now.
Very seriously lacking, yes. And well, we're trying through legislation to establish an access to justice fund. It's something a commission I appointed recommended a year ago. And we tried to get that through last year unsuccessfully. We're trying again to establish an access to justice fund, hopefully to find some fund that would support it so that we don't have to go, in essence, with our hands out every year looking for money. It's so hard to find money. The money is diminishing. The proposal is to redefine abandoned property and raise money that way. We're looking for, first of all, to establish the fund and then to fund it.
Legal aid lawyers keep on going out on strike because they're underpaid.
No, they don't.
And they have such heavy caseloads.
They do have heavy caseloads. They're not well compensated, but they don't keep going out on strike. They're very dedicated attorneys.
Should the governor intervene in the judiciary, whether it be a Judge Duckman situation or the Bronx DA not choosing the death penalty on a case?
Well, these are wonderful questions.
That's why I'm asking everyone.
Should the governor intervene? Absolutely not. I mean, we're an independent branch of government. The governor expresses his view. I mean, he's got his point of view too, but the judiciary is an independent branch of government and decides the issues that are before it without influence of the governor or anyone else.
Here's one that you may find too personal. Which newspapers and magazines do you read regularly? Are there other articles you also read? It says other articles reading.
We receive the New York Times at home, and I very often, my husband reads the paper and I read a brief and he tells me what's in it, what's in the paper. But I read the Law Journal. I guess during court time, mostly I read things that start Court of Appeals of the State of New York.
Are you a fast reader?
I think so.
Usually at the conclusion of these events,
Are we over?
I think so. The star of the evening usually goes out to the lobby and signs books, and you've written a fair number of books.
I've written a lot of articles. I have not written
of the sort that we would want to read here?
I have a brand new article that just came out this week on the subject of Benjamin Nathan Cardozo, and I hope everybody would read it. I'd like to send copies of it to anyone who would like to have it. It's a law piece. On the other hand, I think it's written breezily. It's about what made Benjamin Nathan Cardozo a great judge.
And where is that published?
In the Harvard Law Review.
And you say it's written breezily because lawyers tend to write in impenetrable English.
Well, but I think we're doing better. I think we should use English. We shouldn't use Latin, which was, spoken on the Appian Way and not Broadway. But I think we're again improving our communications with the public. We're trying. Is that
Hereinafter you will.
Like that to be the message, that we're really trying. We care and we're trying.
You expressed surprise that we'd come to the end. Is there something that we left out? Is there something you feel you should have talked about or wanted to talk about?
I don't think so.
Okay, well then, thank you for being with us tonight.
You.
And thank you all for coming. Thank you, Deborah Nato McGee and Emily Hoffman and everyone else involved in this.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.